Now remember, there's a path of method and a path of release. And the path of release is particularly is the special teaching of the super special teaching of the Great Completeness. The Great Completeness also, I say, contains within it the path of method, teaching the Goya Samaja, Tantra, in its own way. Of course, not completely differently from how Gelugpa teaches it, but differently. So, here, Mipam Gyatsho is talking about the path of release, and thus, last time I was talking about the movements within this chapter. So I thought to map out the chapter, putting in brackets. I believe I put 3 in. There'll be more later on in the chapter. So within this section here, on the path of release, you are introduced to and identify the noumenal foundational clear light or mode of abiding. So this, in His Holiness's book, which Snow Lion titled The Heart of Meditation. Pretty good title. So the first of the 3 keys is to be introduced to. Who's doing the introducing? Your Lama. And what you're doing by being introduced to intrinsic awareness is you're identifying intrinsic awareness. Now, if you're lucky, if you've got the appropriate circumstances, you might be able to identify it right away. But also it might take you quite a bit of time. You might, so to speak, have to fish around for it. It wouldn't be a matter of your Lama asking you a question and you're merely giving a verbal answer. Even in koan practice, if you give a verbal answer, that verbal answer would be reflecting an experiential, reflecting an experience. The aim here is to undergo an experience of fundamental mind, intrinsic awareness, whatever we want to call it. The words, you see, can be helpful. Now, one may be able to rattle off a whole lot of names: noumenal foundational clear light, intrinsic awareness, fundamental mind, mode of abiding, right? I don't know how many we could list. Well, one thing we want to do is, I taught pretended to teach, shall I say, the great completeness in Guatemala, in can't even remember the name of the town. And one thing we did is to go through a bunch of the names. Why go through the names? Because the names can stimulate, give you many different names can stimulate, give you some idea, give you some experience of what the names are pointing to. That's why the introduction is called pointing out, instead of using the word introduction, pointing out. Wouldn't that be nice if somebody could point out fundamental mind for you? Hey, you see that this, my husband's sister used to live in here, so we have sort of doily curtains. I was thinking, I want blackout curtains in here. Why do we have, what's the function of a doily curtain? Okay. But pointing out, right, the doily curtains. Pretty easy to do, huh? So pointing out and identifying, so that's the first key. Seeing somebody in a crowd that you know is difficult. But once in a huge crowd, once the person, His Holiness used this metaphor, but once the person's been pointed out and identified, then it's not so hard to see that person again. Or even there's a whole lot of buildings around here. Once it's been pointed out and identified, then you can, oh yeah, oh no, I know that one. So the first key. Then you sustain its continuum. That's the second key. Sustaining its continuum. Once you get a hold of it, then you sustain it. So of course that doesn't mean I don't need to say, you're not just keeping the word, but you're sustaining the experience of it. And the third key, as we mentioned last time, is our techniques for our three ways, put it that way, our three descriptions of how conceptuality dawns and self disappears. But in fact, for the second key to work, the third key is needed. So when His Holiness in that book presents the second key, he says a little bit about the third one. He doesn't say, I'm going to talk about the third one, but he just brings it up. Because how could you sustain the continuum of your realization of intrinsic awareness unless you didn't get carried away by conceptuality, by the thoughts that appear in your mind. Click. Click goes in your mind, and you go, and you've lost what you got a hold of. You've lost it. So, you see it says, Mipam Gyatsho says, you sustain its continuum. The continuum of your, not the introduction so much as the identification. There's just one word in Tibetan. You see, introduction means identification. So, pointing out means you identified it. But of course, it actually is a two-step process. How often, let's give a test to everyone to whom, I'm joking, but really, a test to everyone, the Lama, to whom the Lama gives an identification of the noumenal foundational clear light. Did you get it right away? Right? You take the test. You're sitting, you give everyone a computer. Did you get it right away? And how many say no? And then how long did it take you to get it? And you have a whole lot of, things you got to check. 1 minute, 2 minutes, was it minutes, was it hours, was it days, was it weeks, was it months, was it years, okay? So, I do this double translation, introduce to and identify. If you are meeting somebody, like I'm going to dinner on Sunday, and I'll introduce two people, this is so-and-so. As far as remembering the name goes, I usually can't remember the person's name. And I have to say, would you tell me that person's name again? As far as catching even the name goes, I have a problem. But I'll usually know, especially if we sit down with the person to eat, that we're supposed to eat with this person. But I don't know, if you're at a dinner party and we separate. So, who was that person that I was introduced to earlier? Is it this? I've got no idea who it was, but I did want to learn something. So I really hope that somebody else was there so I could. Okay. Yeah. Even that one's difficult. But usually if you've an intense situation with a Lama, and the Lama, this is how it goes. From where do your thoughts arise? Intense. From where do they arise? And the Lama might say a little something. Might say quite a bit. But might just say, from where do your thoughts arise? So thought comes into your mind, right? And then, where does it stay? Well, it stays for a while, right? Right? Stays for a while. Does it? Little while. Then It goes away, doesn't it? It disappears. Where does it disappear to? Then the Lama says, I'm sorry, I've got to go to bed. And disappears. Goes away. And so that's the pointing out. Could be that short. And leaves you with it. And then when he or she is about to leave the room, turns back and says, come back in a few days and tell me what you find out. And leaves. And so you become enthralled with this. And then maybe as the door is closing, he or she turns back and says, where did the thought come from? Where does it say? Where does it stay? And then where does it go to? Just so to make sure you get it, right? So that's like, he or she has said it maybe 3 times as he realizes that, it's like being introduced to somebody 3 times. Introducing, knows that Jeffrey will forget it. So says the name 3 times. You might not have gotten the name. This is Secretary of State Tillerson. Secretary of State Tillerson. Secretary of State Tillerson. Obviously, I'm going to see Secretary of State Tillerson this Sunday. So that's the pointing out. That's all there is to it. So, 2 of the keys are openly mentioned here. Introduce to and identify as the noumenal foundational clear light. And that's how it's done. And then you sustain its continuum once you have, through this pointing out, have gotten it. And then the third one is 3 types of the self-dawning, thoughts, conceptions, they just appear. There's 3 ways they disappear, which are laid out very nicely in that book by His Holiness in a very traditional way. Khetsun also. Like one way is, and all 3 are really operationally very effective. One is you notice it, oh, that's a thought. And just by recognizing it, that doesn't allow, that keeps you from grabbing it and it's grabbing you. That's a thought. You see? Usually we don't. It just grabs us and we're gone. And what we're trying to keep with, which is the noumenal foundational clear light or mode of abiding, this basic mind that we're trying to stay with, is just forgotten. So that's the first one. The second one is like a snake that's been tied into a knot, somebody's tied it into a knot, it just unties itself. You've gotten used to this process, so you've noticed the thought, and the thought just and the third is you've gotten so used to it, it just itself appears, itself disappears. Rang shar, itself dawns. Rang tro, itself releases itself. Itself dawns, releases itself releases, but releases itself. But you've gotten so used to it. So it's said the third is the best. And so of course you don't think, oh, I want the best, I'm going to do that. Give me a break. I'd say if you don't do number one, you ain't going to get number two. Number three, you know, how are you going to, you're going to run to number three? You know, like, okay, good luck. Your mind's going to be carried away even more so by pride, thinking you can jump to number three. You know, by thinking, I've got this great technique. I've got the great completeness. Or, you know, if you're Gelug, if you're practicing Gelug at the moment, I've got the consequence school. Hooray for you. Put it on your head like a dunce cap. We're to make a dunce cap that says consequence school. Instead of, you know, these Gelugpa and Nyingma hats, we should have a dunce cap that has consequence school. Then we should make a dunce cap that says great completeness. As if you could just put it on. Okay. Whereby, and you see then, whereby familiarization, this is komba, which is komba is familiarization, which is the real meaning of meditation, gomba. So if this, the play on words in Tibetan is used. What is the meaning of meditation, gomba? It's komba, which is familiarization. Sustaining its continuum. And that's how you get to be familiar with it. You get to be familiar. Gels. It's great. It's tremendous. Chakpa. Chakpa mean chakpa gels. Like ice gelling. But it's not, it doesn't mean something cold. It means like jello gelling. That's why is jello called gel? Why is it called jello? Because it's gelled. So this is a fantastic layout. So you see, this is you're not binding the winds, you're not using a construct like binding the winds in the central channel, as in Guhya Samaja. You're not collecting the winds in the central channel and causing a subtle mind to manifest as in Guhya Samaja. You're doing a very different technique in order to bring about some of the same results. And we're going to see below how the results are depicted in a very similar way with some of the similar vocabulary as in the Guhya Samaja Tantra. So, in that one sentence is, it was a very beautifully constructed sentence. So, Gyun Sangpo, to make it clear, says this is what is called meditation. Through meditation, you attain stability. You see familiarization, gelling, that stability with respect to the foundational clear light. You know, this is just many different words for, clear light. That tells you something about what you're going to find, which is the samanta bhadra of the foundational mode of abiding. A whole lot of words. And then the process is described now in some detail. I think we've done enough. Good stuff, eh? I mean, it's typical description of meditation on anything. However, the anything here is meditation on fundamental mind. What's different is not how meditation is described. It's the pointing out, the introduction in identification, which is not done, to repeat, by way of concentrating on, for instance, a tiny drop at a place in the central channel, but is, you could say, you mean to say, it's by some simple ass thing like looking into being asked Jung Ne Dro. Jung means arise. Ne is abide. Dro is go. Jung means from where do your thoughts arise. Ne is abide. Where do they abide? Dro is where do they go. Okay, good to see you.